healthiest thing both individuals can do is to say we are not being healthy towards one another. And so in this passage, I would hear Jesus saying, if you are going to break a relationship, recognize that it will be painful, but also commit yourself to treating the other person with justice. And oaths. You sort of hear Jesus saying, words, words, words. It's all words. I don't care about what you promise me. Show me. Just like the big bad wolf in our story. He had such a hard time saying the words. But then as soon as he said it and the little pigs forgave him, he realized that it wasn't enough for him. That saying the words, I'm sorry, didn't really make him feel like he had changed. It didn't show the change that was inside of him to the world. So Christ says, show me your faith. Don't tell me what you're going to do, just do it. I promised you relationship advice for the month of February. There are 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, according to the Gottman Institute. Last week we talked about criticism, and the Gottman Institute is relationship experts, and they use the 4 horsemen to predict divorce in couples. And they have relationship labs. They observe couples as they talk about issues that divide them or are stressful to that relationship, and they obviously also coach them on how to make it not as stressful to their relationship. But the 4 horsemen are very accurate predictors of whether or not a relationship will end in divorce. Criticism we talked about last week, and relationship experts have looked at children and said, for every 10 negative it takes 10 positive statements to a child to counteract 1 negative statement. Be careful of your words. They have power over the people that we are in relationship with. The second horseman of the apocalypse is contempt. And I use that this week because it fits with Jesus' words about murder and anger. When you harbor anger in your heart and you don't allow it to be productive, don't allow it to move you towards finding a way to bridge the gap between you and somebody else, you run the risk of that anger becoming contempt. Contempt is fueled by long, simmering negative thoughts about the other, which come to a head in the perpetrator attacking the accused from a position of relative superiority. So you tell the story long enough in your head about what the other person has done wrong, without telling them what they've done wrong, that in your head you feel like you are the better person. Contempt is the single greatest predictor of divorce. It can include mocking the other person, eye-rolling if you talk to each other, and of course you would say that. That's so typical of you. Or sarcasm, words that are cutting and not sincere. This kind of behavior doesn't usually happen overnight in a relationship, but it can accrue from a long period of feeling anger or disappointment towards the other person. The fix, the Gottman Institute says the fix is building a culture of appreciation and respect, of telling the other person how you appreciate them, because what you say becomes truth to you. This is why words are so important. So if you say something that is true about them and how you respect them for this part of their characteristics, you start to remember that more. But I say that there's also another fix. The other fix is to disagree. Contempt makes the other person inferior to you without giving them the opportunity to change it. You assume that they have bad motives. You assume that they are wanting to hurt you, when really, they may not. We have no way of knowing what goes on in the mind of another person unless we tell them. Unless we say, hey, it really bothers me when you do this. Our culture right now is very divided, and we have to learn how to be able to disagree with one another, how to be able to do so in a respectful way, in order to say, I'm going to hold you accountable to the words that you have said, but this is where I'm coming from. Can you see why I would have this issue with what you are doing? A culture of appreciation and respect is not a place where everyone agrees on everything. It's not a place where there's no arguments. It's a place where we learn to disagree, where we learn to negotiate over what's important to us. If you are wondering how to do this, there is a fantastic video by Kid President. If you haven't seen Kid President on the web, you have to go look. He's on Soul Pancake, but it's pretty easy to find him. I do include the link in my notes out there. But he has a short video on how to disagree with people. It seems very simple on how to disagree with people, but sometimes we forget that you can do so respectfully. And in fact, that it's important to do so respectfully. It's important to disagree with people because God didn't make us all the same. He made us all with different opinions and different makeups so that together we could be the body of Christ. So if we're going to be the body of Christ, let's make sure that we talk about things. The second, I'm going to do two of the four horsemen. The third horseman of the apocalypse is defensiveness. This is where defensiveness is defined as self-protection. In the form, it takes two forms. Because you are feeling attacked when you get defensive, you either take the form of righteous indignation, how dare you, or innocent victimhood. Why? Why is it always me? In an attempt to ward off a perceived attack. Defensiveness is trying to protect yourself at all costs. Many people become defensive when they are being criticized, which is why we need to learn how to disagree respectfully, so that if you have a problem, you don't automatically put the other person on defensive, but you say, I would like to talk to you about how I'm feeling about this. The problem is, with defensiveness, it never solves the problem at hand. Defensiveness effectively says it's always the other person's fault, not mine. Defensiveness is really a way of blaming your partner. You're saying, in effect, it's not me, it's you. As a result, the problem never gets resolved, and the conflict continues to escalate. And so the fix is actually very easy, but very counterintuitive. The fix for defensiveness is to take your guard down and say, I am responsible for this part of the problem, and I'm sorry for my part of what I have been doing here. The fix is to accept responsibility, to be able to say, no relationship is entirely perfect, and no relationship is made terrible because of one person. It takes two people to fight. So accepting your own agency and your own responsibility is how you fix defensiveness, and how you take your guard down so that you can say, and it's very easy to say, look, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. Can we talk about this, but give me 20 minutes to think about it. So you can give yourself a break and say, okay, why am I feeling so defensive? What am I afraid of? And then come back and say, all right, I understand where you're coming from. This is what I'm sorry for. Tell me where you are. Why does this matter? How does that relate to Jesus' Sermon on the Mount here? At the heart of the Sermon on the Mount, in fact, the only way this sermon can be preached is on the premise of Jesus as Emmanuel. When we remember that Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us. Not God with me, or God with you, God with us. I never thought about that until I read this commentator this week, but I was so floored by that it's not just God with me, not just God with us, that we are a community, that God came to be with us as Jesus because our relationships are important. When we begin to realize that we are not simply members of a community, but we are shapers of community, and that we are shaped by the community, we realize that our God is a God of community. Our relationships matter. How we live our lives matter. It's not just a matter of what we say we believe. It's not just saying the right words and making the right promises. It's how do you live it? How do you put it into practice? So don't try to bend the rules or find loopholes in the commandments. Follow the spirit of the law. Find ways to be reconciled at true peace with one another. so that we can live into the kind of community that God calls us into. And if you're sitting there wondering, where do I even start trying to do this? Well, start by trying to not take things too literally. Otherwise, we fall into the same trap the Pharisees fell in. What is the spirit of Jesus' words? What is he trying to teach us? And he's trying to teach us reconciliation and right relationship. So we should always be asking ourselves as a church, before we come to Christ's table, how are we being reconciled with one another? How are we being in right relationship with one another? How do we hold people accountable to their promises while also offering them grace? It starts from within. It starts with working on your own anger and your own lust and the own injustice and the own hypocrisy that resides in your heart. And when you start dismantling that and trying to take it apart and say, okay, I'm going to set this part of me aside and try to live into a different way of being through Jesus, then work on right relationships with people. Disagreeing with them when you need to, voicing your needs and your concerns when you need to, and building trust as a vital part of your relationships. Then we will be living as spiritual people, and God has tended to growth in our hearts. Let's pray. It's not always comfortable, God, but it is certainly good that you go straight for the heart. You do not allow us to skate over the surface of life, filling our days with dry legality and pretend righteousness. No, you come at us from the inside, challenging our thoughts and attitudes, our motives and perceptions, and shaping them into the fuel for change that gives us hearts like yours and lives that are lived from the inside out. We praise you, O God, for your uncomfortable grace, your transforming spirit, and for the gift of lives lived with integrity and compassion from the inside out. Amen.